Kat is a senior UX researcher at Fitbit. She can be reached through her columbia.edu email, and we'll also share her LinkedIn profile as well. All right, Kat, I'm gonna stop sharing and let you take it away.
Thank you all for being here today. And so, like Francis just mentioned, my name is Kat, and I'm a senior UX researcher. And so, just to kind of start off, what is UX research? And so really my job is to talk to users to understand what their needs, attitudes, and behaviors are, and then to use these insights to help inform product and decision. And so the goal of UX research is to essentially work with teams to make things that provide value and are easy to use. Now, the thing is, does this always happen? Not really. I think we've all experienced products that aren't accessible, and they're not only frustrating, but they feel limiting. And so that's sort of where the idea of inclusive design and inclusive research comes in. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So throughout my career, I've worked with American companies that have been trying to create products for international markets and vice versa. And so as a result, I'm constantly thinking about how research and design is impacted by the intersectionality of things like age and gender and culture. And I think particularly with this group today, we are so much often at that intersection that I feel it's probably something that y'all hear about as well and think about as well. And so today I'd like to share some tips that can really sort of empower anyone, regardless of where you are on your team, whether it's marketing, PM, engineer, customer service, to sort of think of ways where you can try to add more inclusivity into the products of your job or feel empowered to be able to speak to others to do so. And so let's sort of start at the beginning, which is identifying what are the research needs, or essentially what are the things that we need to talk to users about. And so throughout the production cycle, that's probably where you'll be speaking to them. And when you're thinking about this, it's important to narrow down and really understand what you want to know, what these conversations should look like. And this essentially is to help you make sure that you're not missing any blind spots. So 3 questions to ask yourself at this stage is, what do you want to know? What do you already know? And what do you hope to do with this information? And by writing this out and keeping it handy, you really will be able to sort of get a stronger idea of who you want to speak to and identify potential edge cases that it may not have occurred to you before. And at the same time, it helps you make sure that you're keeping within the scope of your work and projects. So now that you've identified a research question, this is the point in which you kind of think about what types of users, what type of people do we want to talk to about our products. And at this point, it's not thinking about your everyday consumer, which inherently might have some bias, but really thinking about who are at the margins. And so there's, the photography exercise called the 12 picture process. And in it, you stand in one spot, and instead of taking a picture of what's in front of you, you're taking a picture of what's above, below, or to your sides. And the reason for that is it's because it asks you to go beyond what's easy, beyond what's just right in front of you as a solution. And so the idea is to really apply that philosophy here. When you're looking at analytics, what are the edge cases? What do you're looking at, not necessarily the patterns, but about the outliers in the situation? And that really can help provide some powerful impacts. When we think about icons that are used on apps or websites, sure, they're visually appealing, but they also make things usable for people who speak different languages or who might have trouble reading small font, or maybe, just might have trouble reading in general. And so the impact can be felt really throughout the entire process. So asking the right questions. So at this point, you might have an idea, okay, we want to speak to a lot of different types of users, a lot of broad audience, but really then you need to think about the questions themselves. So here's a survey question that was sent out to women who identified as lesbian or gay. And there's a problem with this question, and quick 5-second quiz. Can you identify what it is? If you can't, that's okay. The company didn't either until they ended up getting called out on it, and then they actually had to send a new survey out and apologize for the misstep. So what's the answer? Many respondents actually either sometimes or exclusively wore shoes that were in the men's section. And so they weren't sure whether they should put down their shoe size in women's or men's. So what's the takeaway? Be clear and explicit, and think about the context of your questions in a person's everyday life. If not, you risk basing decisions off of bad data, alienating your user base, or having to spend more time and money having to redo projects. There are ways in which you can sort of try to make sure that the questions are clear or explicit. So you could either ask, if you're in the position in which you're the person who's writing these questions, preparing to talk to users, you can ask to do so. Or when you're working with others that are there, test the protocol, be the volunteer to sort of help think about these things. And in addition, a lot of it is being flexible. It's okay to admit that you don't know everything and that you might have to adapt along the way. That's, it's part of the process of learning. It's part of the process of growth. So getting buy-in, I think one of the harder things is you may have recommendations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to jump on board to do it. And so at this point, it's sort of using the data, using that user knowledge that you've gained to sort of help back up those decisions and facilitate inclusivity. Regardless of the role that you have in the company, there are ways in which you can incorporate sort of that user perspective into the conversations that you're having. So for example, if there is research happening, you can either, one, encourage people to go, or you go as well. You can use examples of others in the field that are doing these things that are inclusive and illustrating how it could make your own company competitive or profitable, more profitable. And the other part is creating empathy, right? And having stakeholders put themselves in the shoes of users. Sometimes that's easy, that can be done sometimes by even just starting with Imagine and presenting a real life scenario. So for example, let's say your manager doesn't really see the need to create digital Pride experiences. You could start with, imagine you live in a small town and Pride is one of the few times where you can connect with queer folks, but now it's canceled. So you go online, and then positioning it as, what can we do as a company to make sure that they're coming to us for those digital experiences? So as you look at the summary of sort of this conversation, it's important to remember that inclusive tech starts when there's inclusivity in the entire production cycle. And we're all advocates for systemic change in user research and design. And we can all fight for a world where tech reflects the needs of others and of those all consumers, one user at a time.